still remember how the crystal wine glass caught the light as my mother-in-law raised it above the dinner table. Her gesture was elegant, but calculated, like everything Evelyn did. Her voice, slightly louder than necessary, cut through the ambient restaurant chatter. While he shines, you clean. She smiled at me across the elegantly set table, her eyes gleaming with that familiar look of subtle condescension I'd grown accustomed to over 5 years of marriage to her son. The farewell dinner was supposed to be a celebration of my husband's upcoming business trip to New York, a prestigious assignment that would put him in meetings with the company's international partners. Le Bernardin was impeccable that night, as always. Crystal chandeliers reflected softly on the fine china, and the sommelier had just served an expensive Chardonnay that David's father had specially ordered for the occasion. It was the type of restaurant where reservations needed to be made months in advance, unless your surname was known, and the Mitchell surname certainly opened doors. To David, Evelyn continued, raising her glass even higher, who's always been destined for greatness, always the brightest in the room, always our pride. Everyone at the table, his father Robert, a retired executive with gray hair and impeccable posture, his sister Melissa and her husband Brad, 2 close family friends I barely knew, raised their glasses. I raised mine too, smiling at my husband who sat beside me in his perfectly tailored navy suit. He looked handsome that night, confident, ready to take on the world. David always had that presence that filled a room, tall, with perfectly cut dark hair and piercing blue eyes. 5 years of marriage and my heart still raced when he looked at me that way, but lately that look had become increasingly rare. And to Kate, my mother-in-law added, almost as an afterthought, her tone subtly shifting, who keeps everything running perfectly at home while he conquers the business world. That's when she said it again, with a small deliberate laugh. While he shines, you clean. Everyone at the table laughed. Even David. He squeezed my hand under the table, his way of saying it was just a harmless joke. But something in my chest tightened. 5 years of these harmless jokes had slowly accumulated like sediment in a river, forming something solid and immovable inside me. She's perfect for you, son, commented Robert, raising his glass to me again with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You found a woman who knows her place. Dad, David began, but his tone was more of mild embarrassment than genuine objection. The truth was, I wasn't just keeping things running perfectly at home. I worked at the same company as David in the research department. I had a master's degree in business analytics and had graduated with honors from Yale, the same university where we had met. I had been working on a major project for 6 months, one that would revolutionize how our company processed client data. But somehow, to his family, I was still just David's supportive wife who kept the house tidy. A true blessing to have a wife who doesn't mind taking a back seat, his father added, nodding approvingly at David. Your mother was the same. Always knew her place was supporting me, not competing with me. Evelyn smiled, but I noticed something in her eyes. A momentary shadow that passed so quickly I almost thought I'd imagined it. I took a sip of my wine, letting the cool liquid wash down my throat as I maintained my smile. Years of practice had perfected my ability to keep a pleasant expression, while my thoughts raced in a completely different direction. The apartment's going to feel so empty without you for those 2 weeks, I said to David, changing the subject. You'll have plenty to keep you busy, he replied, his tone casual as he perfectly cut his filet mignon. Besides, I'm sure Mom will check in on you. His mother beamed at this. Of course I will, darling. We could have lunch, maybe do some shopping. I know how lonely it gets when they're away on business. The way she said, they're away on business, carried the weight of her worldview. Men worked important jobs that required travel, while women waited patiently at home. The fact that I had my own career seemed to simply bounce off her perception. Actually, things at work are quite busy right now, I said, keeping my tone light. I've got that data integration project I've been telling you about. Oh, that's nice, my mother-in-law replied dismissively, repositioning the napkin in her lap. "But don't work too hard. David needs you rested and refreshed when he returns." I felt David's hand tighten slightly around mine under the table, a signal to let it go. We'd had this conversation before. "They're from a different generation," he would say. "They don't mean anything by it." Melissa, always quick to change the subject when tension arose, leaned forward. "So, David, tell us about the executives you'll be meeting. Is it true that Richard Jameson will be there? The Global Operations Director?" Something inside me froze at hearing the name, but I kept my expression neutral as the server arrived with our main courses, momentarily saving me from having to respond. As plates of perfectly arranged food were set before each of us, I caught my reflection in the darkened window beside our table. Who was this woman with the practiced smile and careful responses? When had I become so accommodating of being diminished? "Kate actually has a big presentation coming up," David suddenly said, surprising me. "She's been working on a new system that could save the company millions." I turned to him, genuinely touched by this unexpected acknowledgement. "Oh, how nice," his mother said again, in exactly the same tone as before. "Is it some sort of secretarial efficiency system?" I felt, rather than saw, David deflate beside me. He'd tried, at least. That was something. "Not exactly," I replied, cutting into my salmon with precision. "It's a predictive analytics model that identifies market trends before they're visible to traditional metrics." There was a brief silence at the table. "Well," his father finally said, drumming his fingers on the table. "Sounds complicated. Good thing David handles the important client meetings, eh?" He winked at his son. "Speaking of which," Melissa chimed in, "tell us about who you'll be meeting in New York." And just like that, the conversation shifted back to David's upcoming trip. I ate my dinner and nodded at appropriate intervals as he detailed the high-level executives he would be presenting to, the luxury hotel he would be staying in, and the exclusive restaurant reservations his assistant had secured. "Carmichael Partners is interested in implementing our system across all their global offices," David explained, his tone animated. "If we can close this deal, it'll be the biggest of the year." "My son, the deal maker," smiled Robert, raising his glass in a silent toast. "It's all about relationship," David continued. "Building trust, understanding what they really need." "And your presentation? Is it ready?" asked Brad, Melissa's husband, who rarely spoke, but when he did, it was usually sensible. "Pretty much," David replied. "I'll review it on the flight tomorrow. I have some ideas to make it more impactful." What no one at the table knew, not even David, was that I had also been invited to New York. Not as anyone's wife or support system, but because the project I'd been working on had caught the attention of the Global Operations Director. I hadn't told David yet because the invitation had only come through that morning, and I wanted to surprise him. In fact, the invitation wasn't just to attend or participate. Richard Jameson had invited me to present my predictive analytics model as one of the keynote speakers at the leadership conference. The same event where David would be, but in a very different role than anyone at that table could imagine. As dessert arrived, my mother-in-law was in full planning mode for David's return. "I'm thinking we should have a welcome home dinner at our place," she said, delicately breaking into her creme brulee. "Kate, darling, you won't have to do a thing. I know how overwhelmed you get with hosting." Another assumption. Another diminishment. I'd hosted multiple dinner parties that had gone perfectly well, including a charity event for 50 people that raised over $100,000 for underprivileged children. But in her narrative, I was somehow always incapable. "That sounds lovely," I said, taking the final sip of my wine. "But let's see how things go. 2 weeks is a long time. Things might change." My mother-in-law gave me a patronizing smile. "What would change, dear? David will come home successful, as always, and we'll celebrate." What would change indeed? Later that night, as David packed his suitcase for the trip, I sat on our bed watching him methodically fold his dress shirts. Our Upper East Side apartment, though spacious by Manhattan standards, suddenly felt claustrophobic. The cream walls, which I had chosen for their comfortable neutrality, now just seemed bland. "Your mother means well," I said, breaking the silence that had lingered since we left the restaurant. David sighed. "I know she can be a bit old-fashioned." "A bit?" I raised an eyebrow. He stopped packing and sat beside me on the bed. "I'm sorry about tonight." The "while he shines, you clean" comment was out of line. "And yet you laughed," I said quietly, staring at my hands in my lap. David ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I knew well. It was what he did when he felt uncomfortable. "I know. I shouldn't have. It's easier sometimes, you know, to go along with it." Easier for who? He had no answer for that. I took his hand, watching how our fingers intertwined. His, long and elegant. Mine, small but strong. "David, we need to talk about something." The seriousness, the intensity in my tone must have alarmed him, because he turned completely to me, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's wrong?" I took a deep breath. This wasn't how I'd planned to tell him, but the evening had shifted something inside me. A lifetime of carefully managing other people's perceptions and feelings suddenly felt too heavy to carry. "I've been invited to New York too," I said finally, watching his face carefully. His expression cycled through confusion, surprise, and something else I couldn't quite identify. "For the same conference? How? I mean, that's great, but..." "Global Operations wants to see my predictive analytics model," I explained, keeping my voice steady, despite the slight tremor I felt inside. "Director Jameson emailed me personally this morning." "Jameson? You mean Richard Jameson? The global director?" I nodded, trying not to feel hurt by his disbelief. "Yes, that Richard Jameson. Apparently the preliminary results I submitted last month made it to his desk." David stood up and paced our bedroom, running his hand through his hair repeatedly. "Why didn't you tell me earlier? This is huge, Kate." "I was going to surprise you," I said, watching him move like a caged animal. "But after dinner tonight, it didn't feel right to keep it quiet any longer." He stopped pacing and looked at me. "What do you mean?" "Your mother's comment, everyone laughing. You laughing." I met his gaze directly, unflinching. "Do you really see me that way, David? As someone who just cleans up after you shine?" The question hung in the air between us. David sat back down beside me, running his hands over his face. The rough sound of his stubble against his palms was the only noise in the quiet room. "Of course not," he said finally. "You're brilliant at what you do. I've always known that." "But you've never corrected them," I pointed out. "In 5 years, you've never once really stood up to your family when they diminish what I do. Tonight you tried, but then you just let it go." "They're set in their ways," he said, his standard response. "It wouldn't change anything." "It would change things for me," I replied softly, watching how the bedside lamp cast shadows on his worried face. "It would show me that how they see me matters to you." David was quiet for a long moment. Through the window of our bedroom, the lights of Manhattan created a panorama of possibilities. Millions of lives happening simultaneously, each with their own struggles and triumphs. I wondered how many other couples were having similar conversations at that moment, redefining the invisible boundaries of their relationships. "You're right," he finally admitted, his voice low. "I've taken the easy route. It's been easier to let their comments slide than to challenge them. That's on me." I leaned against his shoulder, feeling the familiar warmth of his body against mine. "I love your family, David. I do. But I can't keep being the person they think I am, someone who exists just to support you from the shadows." "You've never been in the shadows to me," he said, wrapping an arm around me and pulling me closer. "Haven't I?" I asked, lifting my face to look into his eyes. When was the last time you talked about my work to your family with the same enthusiasm you talk about yours? He couldn't answer. I'll be flying out 3 days after you, I continued, adjusting myself in his arms. My presentation is on Thursday morning. David nodded slowly. We should tell them you're coming too. No, I said firmly. I don't want to tell them. He looked at me, confused. Why not? Because for once I want them to see me as I am, not as they expect me to be, not as an extension of you. David was quiet for a moment, pondering my words. Are you sure? This seems, I don't know, like you're setting up a trap for them. It's not a trap, I replied, pulling back slightly to face him properly. It's a chance for change. For all of us. You said things wouldn't change if you confronted them. Maybe that's true. But maybe they need to see for themselves to really understand. He nodded slowly, a slight smile forming on his lips. You've always been smarter than all of us, you know. And yet I clean, I responded, but with a slight smile to soften the words. He grimaced. Ouch. Deserved. The next morning, I drove David to the airport. As we said our goodbyes at the departure terminal, he held me longer than usual, his familiar scent, sandalwood with a hint of lemon, wrapping around me like a blanket. Knock them dead in New York, he whispered in my ear. Show Jameson exactly how brilliant you are. I smiled against his shoulder. I will. And Kate? He pulled back to look at me, his hands firmly gripping my arms. I'm sorry. About everything. When we get back, things will be different. I promise. I nodded, wanting to believe him. The promise hung between us, fragile, but full of possibilities. Safe travels. The following days passed in a blur of preparation. I refined my presentation, ran through the demonstration countless times, and carefully selected my wardrobe for New York. Professional, confident, but still authentically me. I worked late every night, perfecting my model, testing different scenarios, ensuring every possible question had an answer. My department colleagues, though surprised by Jameson's invitation, provided valuable feedback and supported me with additional data when needed. Christina, my best friend since college and colleague in the legal department, came to my apartment the night before my trip. Are you ready for this? She asked as we shared a bottle of wine, sitting on my sofa. For the presentation? Yes, I replied. For the rest, I don't know. You mean the part where you finally show the Mitchell family that you're a force to be reckoned with? She smiled, raising her glass to me. I laughed, but the sound came out more tense than I'd intended. It sounds so calculating when you put it that way. It's not calculation, Christina replied, her expression softening. It's setting boundaries. How long have you been putting up with those subtly demeaning comments? Those assumptions that you're just an accessory in David's shining life? 5 years, I sighed. But it's not David's fault. Not entirely. Christina raised a perfectly arched eyebrow. No? He could have put a stop to it a long time ago. It's complicated, I defended, though a small voice inside me agreed with her. It always is, she replied softly. Look, you deserve to be seen, Kate. Really seen. And if it takes a keynote presentation at an international conference to make that happen, so be it. By the time I boarded my flight 3 days later, I felt ready. Not just for the presentation, but for whatever would come after. Something had shifted inside me at that farewell dinner, a quiet determination to no longer live in anyone's shadow, even partially. The plane took off smoothly, and as New York disappeared beneath the clouds, I felt as if I was leaving more than just the city behind. I was leaving a version of myself, the one who smiled politely at diminishments, who accepted being seen as less than she was, who was afraid of disturbing a carefully cultivated balance. My hotel in Manhattan was bustling with conference attendees when I arrived. I spotted colleagues from our company's various global offices, all gathered for the annual leadership summit. David had texted me his schedule, and I knew he'd already presented the previous day. According to his messages, it had gone well. David knocked it out of the park yesterday, one of our colleagues told me in the elevator, not hiding his surprise at seeing me. The clients were impressed. That's great, I said sincerely. David was good at his job, and I was proud of him. Didn't expect to see you here, he continued, eyeing my conference badge. Are you presenting something? Yes, I replied simply. Tomorrow morning. His eyebrows raised slightly. Oh, well, good luck. That evening, I met David for dinner. He looked tired but happy, the successful presentation having boosted his confidence even higher. The restaurant he had chosen was elegant, but not ostentatious, one of our favorites whenever we visited the city. How are you feeling about tomorrow? He asked over our meal, the candlelight dancing on his face. Nervous, I admitted, swirling my glass of red wine. But ready. He reached across the table to squeeze my hand. You're going to be amazing. Your model is revolutionary, Kate. They'd be idiots not to see that. I smiled. Thank you. That means a lot. Have you told your family you're here? I asked after a moment. He looked slightly guilty. Not exactly. I mentioned I was having dinner with a colleague tonight. I tried not to let my disappointment show. I see. It's not because I'm not proud of you, he hurried to explain, setting his fork aside. It's just, I thought it would be better for them to find out when you blow everyone away tomorrow. I wasn't entirely convinced, but I let it go. Tomorrow would speak for itself. That night, I barely slept. Not from anxiety, but from a strange, electric anticipation. The woman who would walk onto that stage tomorrow wasn't the same one who had smiled politely at her mother-in-law's dinner table. This version of me had stopped making herself smaller to fit into others' expectations. As I prepared the next morning, I chose my outfit carefully, a structured navy dress under a well-cut blazer, elegant but comfortable heels, and the pearl necklace my grandmother had given me when I graduated, a woman who always told me never to dim my light to make others feel comfortable. The conference room was packed that morning. My presentation was scheduled just before lunch, a prime spot that Director Jameson had personally arranged. As I waited backstage, I saw David slip discreetly into the back of the room. He gave me a thumbs up from a distance, his eyes shining with something that seemed genuinely pride. Then I spotted them, my in-laws. They were being led to seats near the front by an usher. David's mother, father, and sister, all dressed impeccably, looking slightly confused as to why they had been invited to this particular session. My heart raced. David must have arranged this. A text message confirmed my suspicion. Surprise. Told them there was a special presentation they wouldn't want to miss. Show them who you really are. When Director Jameson introduced me as the brilliant mind behind our new predictive analytics system, I walked onto the stage with my head high. The momentary shock on my in-laws' faces when they saw me approach the podium was something I'll never forget. Good morning, I began, my voice steady and clear, resonating through the microphone to the packed room. Today, I'm going to show you how we can revolutionize the way we understand market trends. For the next 30 minutes, I owned that room. The complex system I'd developed, the months of research, the innovative approach to data integration. I presented it all with confidence and clarity. The audience was engaged, asking thoughtful questions that I answered with expertise. Even the notoriously difficult VP of Technology nodded with approval during my real-time demonstration of the model. What we're seeing here, I explained, indicating the large graph projected behind me, is the system's ability to predict market fluctuations with 87% accuracy, a 43% increase over our current methods. An impressed murmur went through the audience. I saw executives leaning forward in their chairs, eyes fixed on the data I was presenting. And my in-laws? They sat in stunned silence, their expressions shifting from confusion to surprise. to something that looked almost like respect. Evelyn, in particular, seemed completely stunned, her mouth slightly open as I explained the mathematical complexities behind the model that had taken a year to develop. When the presentation concluded, Director Jameson returned to the stage, his large warm hand between my shoulder blades, as he presented me to the applauding audience. "This is exactly the kind of innovation that will define our company's future," he announced, his powerful voice echoing through the room. "Kate will be heading up our new predictive analytics division, effective immediately." The applause was thunderous. Jameson leaned in to whisper, "Impressive, Kate. Can we talk about your compensation package later? I'm thinking about a transfer to the London office." As I made my way off the stage, colleagues I'd never spoken to before stopped to congratulate me. Through the crowd, I caught sight of David. He was beaming with genuine pride. And beside him stood his family. His mother's expression was unreadable, but there was no dismissive smile now. His father looked like he had aged 10 years in the last 30 minutes, and Melissa was looking between David and me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher completely. I walked directly toward them, my head held high, feeling an energy I'd never experienced before. It wasn't about revenge or even about proving something. It was about finally fully occupying the space that had always been rightfully mine. "That was," Evelyn began, her voice faltering. For the first time since I'd met her, my mother-in-law seemed genuinely at a loss for words. David stepped forward, his arm wrapping around my waist. "Amazing, isn't it? I've always said she was the brilliant mind in the family." I looked at him, surprised by the firmness in his voice. There was no hesitation there, no desire to soften the moment for his parents' comfort. "I had no idea," Robert said finally, extending his hand to me. "I really had no idea." I took his hand, noting how he looked me directly in the eyes for the first time. "There's a lot about me you don't know," I replied softly. "Maybe it's time to change that." The silence that followed felt both eternal and momentary. Melissa was the first to break it, her usual composure slightly fractured. "Kate, I had no idea you were doing work at this level." "Few people did," I replied, my voice steady despite the adrenaline still coursing through me. "It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're underestimated." A small group of executives approached us, eager to discuss my presentation further. I noticed how they addressed me directly, no longer looking past me to David as they usually did at company events. "We should celebrate," David said once the crowd had thinned. "Dinner tonight? All of us?" I saw the hesitation in his parents' faces, the subtle recalibration happening behind their eyes. For the first time, they were seeing me not as David's wife, but as someone with accomplishments of my own. Accomplishments that had just been recognized at the highest level of the company. "That would be lovely," I said, surprising myself with how genuinely I meant it. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about recognition. "I'd like that." We agreed to meet at 7 at a restaurant, David suggested. As the in-laws made their excuses and departed, clearly needing time to process what they'd witnessed, David pulled me into a quiet corner. "I've never been more proud," he said, his eyes bright with emotion. "You were incredible up there." "You knew they'd be shocked," I said, not a question, but a statement. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "Yes, but I didn't know Jameson was going to announce your promotion. That was, wow, Kate, director of a whole new division." The reality of it was still sinking in for me too. When Jameson had invited me to present, he'd mentioned potential advancement, but nothing this significant. It was everything I'd worked for, everything I'd quietly dreamed about while listening to others dismiss my capabilities. "We should talk about London," I said, remembering Jameson's whispered comment. A shadow crossed David's face. "London? What about London?" Jameson mentioned a transfer, to head the division from there. I watched the information register. David's job was firmly anchored in New York. His family, his network, his entire professional identity was built around his position here. London, he repeated, his tone unreadable. That's big. It is, I agreed. But we don't need to figure it out now. Today is for celebrating. He nodded, but I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes. For the first time in our relationship, my career had taken a leap that would require him to adapt to me, not the other way around. The afternoon passed in a whirlwind of congratulations and introductions. I met board members who suddenly knew my name, was invited to strategy sessions I'd previously been excluded from, and received 3 offers to speak at industry conferences before the day was even over. By the time I returned to my hotel room to change for dinner, I felt simultaneously exhausted and exhilarated. As I slipped into the black dress I'd packed for just such an occasion, I caught myself in the mirror and paused. The woman looking back at me was the same as yesterday, and yet entirely different. There was a certainty in her posture, a directness in her gaze that hadn't been there before. The restaurant David had chosen was one of New York's finest, a Michelin-starred establishment overlooking Central Park. As the hostess led me to our table, I saw that the in-laws were already there, cocktails in hand, engaged in what appeared to be serious conversation. They straightened as they saw me approach, their expressions carefully composed. Kate. Robert stood, pulling out my chair. The woman of the hour. The gesture was small but significant, a courtesy he'd never extended to me before. I smiled and took my seat, noting how Evelyn was watching me with new eyes, assessing me as if seeing me for the first time. David will be joining us shortly, I said, accepting the menu from the server. He had a call with the Tokyo office. Of course, Evelyn nodded. Important work. There was a beat of silence, and then she added, like yours, clearly. I met her gaze directly. Yes, like mine. Melissa, ever the diplomat, raised her glass. To Kate's success. That presentation was remarkable, even to someone like me who barely understood the technical aspects. We clinked glasses, and for a moment, it felt almost normal. Almost like a family celebrating together without the undercurrents that had defined our relationship for years. I have to ask, Robert said after we'd ordered, leaning forward slightly. Why didn't you tell us about this project? About your position in the company? The question was direct, but his tone lacked its usual edge of judgment. I did, I replied simply. Many times. At dinners, at holiday gatherings. I talked about my research, my team, the model we were developing. I don't remember that. Evelyn frowned. That's part of the problem, I said quietly. You heard, but you didn't listen. It was easier to see me as just David's supportive wife than as someone with ambitions of my own. Robert shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We never meant to... I know, I interrupted, softening my tone. You never consciously intended to dismiss me, but the effect was the same. Evelyn was quiet for a long moment, twisting the diamond tennis bracelet on her wrist, a nervous habit I'd noticed over the years. When I was younger, she finally said, I had plans too. Did you know I was accepted to medical school? This was news to me. In 5 years, Evelyn had never shared anything about her life before marriage beyond the most superficial details. I didn't know that, I replied, genuinely surprised. Robert was starting his career, she continued, not quite meeting my eyes. Someone needed to create the home, manage the social connections. It made sense at the time. Mom never told you that story? David's voice came from behind me as he approached the table. He bent to kiss my cheek before taking his seat. Sorry I'm late. Tokyo waits for no one. No, I said, looking at Evelyn with new understanding. She never did. Ancient history. Evelyn waved her hand dismissively, but the gesture lacked conviction. The world is different now. Women have options. They always did, I said gently. But those options were often buried under expectations. David cleared his throat. I ordered champagne. I think we have a lot to celebrate tonight. As the server arrived with the bottle, I watched the Mitchell family with new eyes. They weren't villains in my story. They were products of their time, their upbringing, their own compromises. Even David, who'd benefited from the dynamic without creating it, was struggling to navigate the shifting ground beneath our relationship. A toast, David said, once our glasses were filled. To Kate. To her brilliant mind, her perseverance, and her new role as director of predictive analytics. Everyone raised their glasses. There was respect in their eyes now. Tentative, but real. And, he added, his voice taking on a more serious tone, to changes ahead. Kate's been offered a position in London. I hadn't expected him to bring it up so directly, so publicly. Evelyn's glass froze halfway to her lips. London? She echoed. You're moving to London? It's a possibility, I clarified. Nothing's decided yet. But you'd consider it? Robert asked, looking between David and me. What about David's position here? And there it was, the automatic assumption that my career would bend around his, not the other way around. We have decisions to make, David said before I could respond. Important ones. But tonight isn't about that. Tonight is about recognizing Kate's achievement. I squeezed his hand under the table, grateful for his redirection. The dinner progressed with a strange new dynamic. For the first time, the in-laws asked me questions about my work, my team, my vision for the new division. They weren't just being polite. There was genuine curiosity in their inquiries. David watched with a mixture of pride and something else. Perhaps the realization of how much had been missed over the years. As dessert arrived, Melissa leaned forward, her expression sincere. I owe you an apology, Kate. I never stood up when Mom and Dad, well, when they made those comments. The while he shines, you clean thing. I appreciated her directness. Why didn't you? She considered this, fiddling with her dessert spoon. It was easier not to just go along with the family narrative. She glanced at her parents. No offense. No, she's right, Robert said, surprising me with his candor. We've been set in our ways, seeing things how we expected to see them, not how they actually were. The question is, I said, meeting each of their gazes in turn, where do we go from here? Forward, David said firmly. Together, but differently. As we finished our meal and prepared to leave, Evelyn touched my arm lightly. Kate, I'd like to have lunch tomorrow, just the two of us. Would that be possible? The request surprised me. In 5 years, Evelyn had never sought out my company independently. I'd like that, I replied, meaning it. As we stepped out into the cool New York night, David slipped his arm around my waist. You changed everything today, he murmured, not just at work. It wasn't just me, I said, watching his family get into their taxi. You helped make it happen, bringing them to the presentation. I should have done more sooner, he admitted. But I'm starting now. The city lights glittered around us, full of possibility. For the first time since that fateful dinner, I felt truly seen, not just by my in-laws or my colleagues, but by myself. The next morning dawned clear and bright. I woke early, my mind already racing with ideas for the new division, questions about the potential London position, and thoughts about my upcoming lunch with Evelyn. David was still asleep beside me, his features softened in repose. I slipped quietly out of bed and made my way to the hotel's small desk. I opened my laptop and found an email from Jameson, sent at 4:30 a.m. Clearly, the man never slept. Meeting at 10 now to discuss London. Details attached. The compensation package outlined in the attachment made my breath catch. It was nearly double my current salary, with stock options and relocation benefits that would set us up comfortably in one of the world's most expensive cities. But it wasn't just about the money. It was the opportunity to build something from the ground up, to implement my vision without the constraints I'd faced in New York, to step fully into my potential without the shadow of being David's wife hanging over my professional identity. That's quite an offer. I turned to find David awake, watching me from the bed. He nodded toward the laptop screen. "It is," I agreed, "but it's also complicated." He sat up, running a hand through his sleep-tousled hair. "Because of me. Because my position is here. Because our life is here," I corrected gently. "Your family, our friends, the apartment we've made into a home." David was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You know, when we met at Yale, everyone thought you were the one destined for greatness." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Really," he nodded. "Brilliant, driven Kate Sullivan, who could run circles around everyone in the economics department, including me." What happened?" I asked, genuinely curious about his perspective. He sighed. "Life, I guess. My family's connections opened doors. You were focused on building your models, your research. I was playing the corporate game, networking, being visible. Being male didn't hurt either," I added, but without bitterness. "No, it didn't," he acknowledged. "But somewhere along the way, I started believing my own hype, started taking for granted that my career would always be the priority." I moved to sit beside him on the bed. "I let it happen too. It was easier to go along, to focus on supporting you rather than fighting for recognition. Until now," he smiled, taking my hand. "Until now," I agreed. We sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both contemplating the crossroads before us. "I could transfer," he said finally. "New York isn't the only office that needs client managers." The offer hung in the air between us, significant in its reversal of our usual dynamic. "Let's not decide anything yet," I replied. "I still need to meet with Jameson, understand exactly what they're proposing, and you've got that Carmichael deal to close." He nodded, bringing my hand to his lips. "Whatever happens, I'm proud of you. And I'm sorry it took me so long to really show it." The meeting with Jameson was brief, but productive. He outlined his vision for the London office, the central role my analytics division would play in the company's future strategy, and the timeline for the transition. "Take a week to discuss it with David," he said as we concluded. "But know that this is a rare opportunity. We need you on this, Kate." As I left the meeting, I checked my phone to find a message from Evelyn, confirming our lunch at a small bistro near Central Park. The knot of tension I'd expected to feel at the prospect was surprisingly absent. After yesterday's revelations, I was genuinely curious about what she wanted to discuss. The bistro was quiet when I arrived, the lunch rush not yet begun. Evelyn was already seated, looking slightly out of place in her designer suit among the casual diners. She stood as I approached, offering a smile that seemed less practiced than her usual social expression. "Thank you for meeting me," she said as we sat down. "I imagine your schedule is quite full after yesterday's announcement." "It's been busy," I acknowledged, "but I'm glad we could do this." There was an awkward pause as we studied our menus and placed our orders. Once the server had departed, Evelyn folded her hands on the table, her posture straight, but less rigid than usual. "I owe you an apology, Kate," she began, her voice steady but quieter than her normal confident tone. "For years of, well, for not seeing you, for reducing you to a role rather than recognizing you as a person with your own ambitions and talents." The directness of her apology surprised me. I'd expected deflection, perhaps a softened acknowledgement, but not this forthright admission. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." "When you married David, I assumed you'd follow the pattern I knew," she continued, the wife supporting her husband's career, finding fulfillment in that support. It never occurred to me that there could be another way. Because that was your experience, I suggested gently. She nodded, a flicker of something vulnerable crossing her face. Yes, as I mentioned last night, I had other plans once, different dreams. Medical school, I prompted. Pediatric surgery specifically, she clarified, a hint of the old passion briefly illuminating her features. I was top of my class at Wellesley, had my acceptance to Johns Hopkins. What happened? I asked, though I could guess the outline. Robert's father offered him a position in the family business, a promising start with a clear path to partnership. We were already engaged. She trailed off, twisting her wedding ring. It made sense at the time. One medical student with debt, or two young professionals with stability. You chose stability, I said, understanding rather than judging. I chose family, she corrected. And I don't regret it, not exactly. Robert's career provided us with a wonderful life. David and Melissa had everything they needed. But you gave up a part of yourself. I finished for her. She met my eyes directly. Yes. And somewhere along the way, I forgot that it was a choice at all. It became the natural order of things. Men build careers, women build homes. Our food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. When the server departed, Evelyn continued, her voice taking on a new resolve. Watching you yesterday, it reminded me of who I was at your age, before I made myself smaller to fit into the space I thought I was allowed to occupy. The honesty in her words touched me deeply. This wasn't the Evelyn Mitchell I thought I knew, the perfectly coiffed society wife with her subtle barbs and dismissive glances. This was a woman with depths I'd never been permitted to see. It's not too late, you know, I said impulsively, to pursue something that's just for you. She gave a small laugh, but it wasn't dismissive. At my age? After all this time? Why not? Medicine might be difficult to return to, but there are other ways to use that passion. Hospital boards, medical charities, advocacy work. Something sparked in her eyes. Interest, possibility. I do sit on several boards already. Mostly as Robert's wife, of course. But perhaps they could benefit from someone with a genuine interest in medicine, I suggested. Someone who might have been a doctor in another life. She was quiet for a moment, contemplating. You know, when I made that comment at the farewell dinner, while he shines, you clean, I wasn't just talking about you and David. You were talking about yourself too, I realized. She nodded, a rueful smile playing on her lips. Projection, I believe the therapists call it. Seeing in others what you can't acknowledge in yourself. We ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, both processing the unexpected turn our relationship had taken. I found myself wondering how many other women carried similar stories, ambitions set aside, potential unrealized, all in service to a narrative they didn't write, but somehow ended up living. David mentioned you might move to London, Evelyn said eventually. It's a possibility, I confirmed. Nothing's decided yet. Bacon, what does David think about potentially following your career? The question was asked without judgment, with genuine curiosity. We're figuring it out, I replied honestly. It's new territory for both of us. She nodded thoughtfully. Marriage is constant negotiation, constant recalibration. Robert and I just stopped negotiating at some point. As we finished our meal, I felt a newfound respect for my mother-in-law forming. Not because she'd suddenly transformed into a different person, but because I was finally seeing the complexity behind the facade she presented to the world. Whatever you and David decide about London, she said as we prepared to leave. I hope we can start fresh. See each other clearly from now on. I'd like that, I replied, meaning it. We parted with a warmth that had never existed between us before. As I walked back toward my hotel, my phone buzzed with a message from David. Closed the Carmichael deal. Dinner tonight to celebrate both our victories? I smiled, typing back my agreement. The New York streets bustled around me, everyone rushing toward their own destinations, their own dreams. For the first time in years, I felt fully aligned with mine. That evening, as David and I shared a quiet dinner at our favorite small Italian restaurant, away from the corporate crowds and family expectations, we began to map out possibilities for our future. London, New York, perhaps even a compromise with time split between offices. The path wasn't clear yet, but the conversation itself felt revolutionary. 2 careers given equal weight, 2 ambitions treated with equal respect. You know what I keep thinking about? David said as we finished our meal. That comment my mother made, while he shines, you clean. I raised an eyebrow. Not my favorite memory of the week. No, he agreed with a small smile. But it wasn't just wrong because it diminished you. It was wrong because it fundamentally misunderstood how relationships work, how we work. How so? I asked, curious about his perspective. We don't take turns shining, he said thoughtfully. When we're at our best, we amplify each other's light. I reached across the table to take his hand, feeling a swell of emotion. That's actually quite beautiful. I can be profound occasionally, he grinned. Then, more seriously, I'm just sorry it took me so long to understand it, to really see you. We're seeing each other now, I said softly. That's what matters. As we stepped out into the New York night, the future stretched before us, uncertain in its details, but clearer in its foundation. Whatever decisions awaited us, whatever challenges we would face them as equals. No more shadows, no more diminishment. Just 2 people, walking side by side, illuminating the path forward together. The next morning, as we prepared to check out of the hotel and return to our regular lives, albeit lives transformed by the events of the past few days, I received an unexpected message from Evelyn. Found information on a medical education foundation looking for board members with interest in healthcare access. Would value your thoughts. I showed the message to David, who read it with raised eyebrows. Well, he said with a smile, it seems I'm not the only Mitchell learning to see clearly. Progress, I agreed, typing back an enthusiastic response to Evelyn. Progress indeed. Not perfection, not a fairy tale ending, but the beginning of something more authentic. A life where I no longer cleaned while others shined, but where we all recognized the brightness each of us brought to the world. And in that recognition lay true power. Not the power of position or title, though those were nice too, but the power that comes from being fully seen, fully valued, and fully yourself.